Let's rank these 5 maniacs by... Nope, you cannot rank maniacs. Number 5, Ted Bundy, the charming psychopath. Ted Bundy, the guy who could have had a career in politics, or at the very least, sold you a used car with a smile. Instead, he decided to pursue a far more sinister hobby: serial killing. With over 30 confirmed victims, Bundy used his good looks and charm to lure young women into his trap. He wasn't your average creepy villain. This guy was smart, smooth-talking, and could convince almost anyone to trust him. But how did he go from a law student with a bright future to one of America's most notorious serial killers? Bundy had a particular set of skills, deception being at the top of the list. One of his favorite tricks? Pretending to be injured. He'd wear a fake cast or use crutches, asking women for help. And like a scene straight out of a horror movie, they'd never see the danger coming. Once they offered assistance, he'd strike, luring them into his car or a secluded area where their fate was sealed. His superpower? Being weirdly charming and attractive while also being one of the most twisted individuals to ever walk the earth. It's like if your charismatic college professor turned out to be the villain in a horror movie. He used his charm as a weapon, making it all the more terrifying that someone so seemingly normal could be so deadly. And Bundy didn't stop with the murders. His confidence knew no bounds. He actually defended himself in court, because why trust a lawyer when you're as sure of yourself as Ted Bundy? In the end though, he got what every serial killer deserves: a seat in the electric chair. And guess what? No one felt bad. Number 4, John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown. Everyone loves clowns, right? Well, meet John Wayne Gacy. The reason no one invites them to birthday parties anymore. By day, Gacy was Pogo the Clown, a fun-loving entertainer who brought joy to children's events and charity functions. But by night, he transformed into something straight out of a horror movie. A certified psycho with a body count that would make even Stephen King's It seem tame. This guy didn't need a sewer balloon to terrify you. So how did a seemingly harmless local clown manage to pull off one of the most horrific killing sprees in US history without raising alarms? Gacy's ability to lead a double life was chilling. On the surface, he was the friendly neighborhood clown, always volunteering and making people laugh. But once the sun set, his true nature emerged. Gacy would lure young men and boys to his home, often under the pretense of offering them work or hanging out, only to sexually assault and murder them. His victims were typically marginalized or troubled youths, which allowed him to fly under the radar for years. The real kicker? Gacy buried 33 of his victims under his own house. That's right, this guy wasn't just a serial killer, he was a terrible landlord. Imagine stumbling across his Airbnb listing. Charming home with a crawl space perfect for storage. Just don't ask what's in there. It's safe to say no one would be lining up to rent that place once the gruesome truth was discovered. Eventually, Gacy's crimes caught up with him, and in 1978, he was arrested. The man who once wore clown makeup traded it in for prison stripes, and in 1994, he finally met his end via lethal injection. And even a sad clown act couldn't save him. It was probably the only performance anyone was actually looking forward to. John Wayne Gacy's reign of terror finally came to a close, and no one was sad to see him go. Number 3, Andrei Chikatilo, the Russian monster. Heading over to Russia, we have Andrei Chikatilo, because apparently vodka isn't the only thing chilling over there. Born in 1936, Chikatilo was a man so bad at his day job that he turned to serial killing as a backup plan. Couldn't cut it as a teacher? No problem. He decided to cut something else instead. People. If you think this is the plot of a twisted horror movie, think again. Chikatilo preyed on the vulnerable, earning himself the nickname the Butcher of Rostov. So, what made Chikatilo one of the most dangerous men in Russia, and how did he evade the authorities for so long? First, he blended perfectly into the bleak backdrop of the crumbling Soviet Union in the 1980s. Imagine a man so forgettable, so lacking in charisma, that no one would ever suspect him of being a monster. Well, that was Chikatilo. He used his job as a teacher to get close to his victims, mostly women and children, and lured them with promises of food, shelter, or money. Once he had them alone, he'd unleash unspeakable violence, murdering and mutilating over 50 people across the Soviet landscape. His reign of terror lasted more than a decade. The scariest part? Even the KGB couldn't catch this guy for years, mostly because he looked like your average unassuming citizen. In fact, Chikatilo blended in so well with the 1980s Soviet fashion, where everyone looked like they were surviving an apocalypse, that he was almost invisible. When the authorities finally caught up with him in 1990, Chikatilo confessed to his horrific crimes. In 1994, the Soviet Union gave him a fitting "Do svidaniya" with a bullet to the head. And just like that, one of Russia's most prolific killers was finally put down. No one toasted to that one, but we can all agree that justice was served. Number 2, Mel Popov, the werewolf. Mel Popov, also known as the werewolf, because apparently being a police officer by day and a serial killer by night just wasn't creepy enough. Born in 1964, Popov was a man of two faces. By day, he was a trusted law enforcement officer in Russia, the guy you'd think was there to protect you. By night, however, he transformed into one of Russia's most prolific serial killers, responsible for the brutal murders of 78 women. Popov's tactic was simple and terrifying. He'd offer women rides home, using his badge and position to gain their trust. Once in his car, the nightmare began. Popov would brutally assault and murder his victims, leaving a trail of horror across Russia that lasted for over 2 decades. If you thought your Uber driver was sketchy, you haven't heard about Popov's late-night rides. He preyed on the very people he was supposed to protect, hiding in plain sight and using his authority to evade suspicion. So how did he manage to operate for so long without raising alarms? Well, Popov's ability to blend in was disturbingly effective. He was a respected police officer, which meant that even as the bodies piled up, no one thought to look his way. His position shielded him from scrutiny, allowing him to continue his killing spree right under the noses of his colleagues. Imagine working alongside a guy who turns into a werewolf at night, but without needing a full moon. Eventually, in 2012, the truth caught up with Popov. He was arrested and convicted for his crimes, earning the nickname The Werewolf. He was sentenced to life in prison, which feels like a fitting end, though it's a shame someone didn't lock him up in his werewolf cage earlier. Number 1, Javed Iqbal, the Pakistani nightmare. Finally, we arrive at the man who tops our list of horrors, Javed Iqbal, a killer whose crimes were so grotesque that even his own confession left people in utter shock. Born in 1956, Iqbal targeted Pakistan's most vulnerable, runaway boys. He lured over 100 boys into his home with promises of shelter and safety, only to murder them and dissolve their bodies in acid. Think Breaking Bad, but without the chemistry degree. For years, Iqbal managed to evade justice, with no one suspecting the gruesome reality unfolding behind the closed doors of his home. But then, in a shocking twist, Iqbal decided to confess to his crimes, not out of guilt, because who feels guilty after dissolving not 1, but 100 children? Instead, he sent a letter to the police detailing exactly how he killed 100 boys and dissolved their bodies, as if he had just unlocked an achievement in a video game and wanted to share it with his friend on Steam. His bold confession sent shockwaves through Pakistan, leaving the public horrified at the extent of his cruelty. And just when the world thought justice would be served, Iqbal took the coward's way out. Before facing the full weight of the law, he killed himself in his prison cell, robbing his victims' families and the world of seeing him face real justice. His death felt like a final act of control, a last F you, to show that he lived and died on his own terms. So why do these terrifying figures keep us glued to their stories? Maybe it's because they're living proof that reality is weirder and a whole lot darker than fiction. Or maybe it's just because we're all secretly relieved they were caught before anyone had the chance to swipe right on them on Tinder. Unfortunately, this list could go on, but honestly, I've had enough of talking about these psychos for one day. 2 things are crystal clear after looking at this rogues gallery. 1, humanity definitely has a dark side, and 2, you should always lock your doors. And never ever trust a clown.